All right, I'm back with some more trade talk here on the Nation Network YouTube, and decided to do things a little bit differently this time around. I sent out the call the other day, and I wanted your trade proposals, deals that you think the Oilers could or should make ahead of the trade deadline, deals that you think are fair and reasonable, and I said I would go ahead and critique them. And boy, we got a lot of responses on Twitter, almost 60 responses and trade proposals on Twitter and Instagram combined. I sifted through them though and picked out a few of my favorites. So let's start with one from Thack Attack 41 on Twitter. Here's the deal: Kemper to Edmonton, Koskinen, Olivier Rodrigue, and a 2023 third-round pick to Chicago, and Colorado gets Marc-Andre Fleury. So basically, the start of this deal is Fleury goes to Colorado in exchange for Kemper. Chicago's perspective is, hey, they got Kemper. He's a pending UFA. They can flip him to another team that needs a goalie, like Edmonton, and get some assets back in the deal. He's at a reasonable cap hit, but Edmonton would still have to include Koskinen in the deal. So that makes sense. But Koskinen is a bit of a negative asset at this point. The Oilers would have to throw something into a deal to get the other team just to take his money. The 2023 third-round pick, I'm not sure if that's enough value for a guy like Kemper and for Chicago to take on the Mikko Koskinen deal. Olivier Rodrigue at this point isn't much of a high-level prospect at all, so he's not much of a factor either. I do think the framework of this deal actually makes sense, but I think the Oilers would have to give up more in this one. Probably looking at maybe that second-round pick in 2023, maybe a prospect that's a little bit more high-end. But I think the structure of this deal makes sense, and if it doesn't work in this example, maybe it works because Colorado gets Fleury and they want to trade Pavel Francouz. Maybe it works in a place like Washington. They're rumored to be in on Fleury, and if they get him, Vitek Vanacek could very well be on the move as well. And Vanacek is a guy I think the Oilers should certainly be interested in if that happens. So I like the structure of the deal. I just think the value is off just a touch. The next one I got is from Macklin Talk 1 on Twitter, and this was a big one between the Edmonton Oilers and Seattle Kraken. He has Edmonton dealing Yamamoto, the first-round pick this year, Samurikov, and Koskinen. Edmonton would get Jared McCann, Carson Soucy, and Chris Driedger. And listen, I like these pieces Edmonton's getting back. Jared McCann has 16 goals in 37 games this year. He is a pending RFA, though. Carson Soucy has a year left on his deal at $2.75 million, but he's a good left-shot defenseman. And Chris Driedger had a great season with Florida last year, but he's slowed down a little bit this year. So has Philip Grubauer in the crease in Seattle. And the other thing with Driedger, he has 2 more years after this at a cap hit of $3.5 million. And I'm not a person who's totally convinced he can be a number one. And if Edmonton's going to give up a package like Yamamoto, Samurikov, and the first, I know they're including Koskinen in there as well, then I'd like to be getting a slam dunk fit, something they really, really need that's more of a sure bet to fill an important hole. Jared McCann would be a great addition to any team, but the Oilers don't really need that right now. Carson Soucy, as a left defenseman, he'd probably be on their third pairing or their second pairing, and with the extra year on that deal, I like Soucy as a player, but I'm not sure if there's really a natural fit there with Edmonton. And Chris Driedger, I don't love the extra 2 years on his contract. I think if you're going to give up this many assets, I would prefer that the Oilers maybe go out there and get a goalie who can be their starter for the next 5-6 years and is maybe more of a sure bet than someone like Chris Driedger is. My friend Original Puzar talked about this a little bit. It's an interesting idea, but at the end of the day, I think the Oilers are just giving up a little bit too much and not getting a slam dunk, big piece in their roster that they really need, like a goalie or like a really, really good left-handed defenseman. So I would pass on this deal from Edmonton's perspective. The next one I got is from Jetto1963, who has Tyson Barrie and Derek Ryan going to Seattle for Carson Soucy and Joonas Donskoi. And I actually think the fit of Tyson Barrie going to Seattle makes a bit of sense. As my friend Original Puzar pointed out on Twitter, Mark Giordano's their number one power play guy, and they're likely moving him before the deadline. Barrie could be a player who slides into that Kraken lineup pretty nicely, under contract for a few years. I think Seattle actually would potentially be interested in this, but I don't love the deal from Edmonton's perspective. Soucy on the left side, yes, he's an upgrade on Tyson Barrie defensively, and they could use that because they have Bouchard to play on the power play. Darnell Nurse can help out there as well. I don't like the idea of Joonas Donskoi, though. He doesn't have a goal yet this season, and this is a guy who carries a pretty big cap hit, $3.9 million for this year and next year. The idea of losing Barrie's money, I'm all for it, but bringing in a guy like Donskoi who has a similarly high contract, I'm not a big fan of that, so I would pass on this deal if I was the Oilers. Moving on to a new team. This was a real spicy one from @OilersDarkness. He has Edmonton getting Korpisalo and Patrik Laine, who Elliot Friedman has actually talked about a little bit in his 32 Thoughts podcast and blog about a guy who could maybe be on the move if Columbus doesn't want to lock him up long term. But he has Barrie and Kassian going back to Columbus, and then a second going to Arizona to take Koskinen. So I think the second to Arizona is actually a bit of an overpay in this situation to get that money off the books. It really shouldn't cost more than a 4th or 5th round pick for the Oilers in this instance. And the deal, like, I love the idea of getting Laine, and you're going to need Barrie and Kassian going the other way to make the money work. But the Oilers aren't giving up nearly enough in this situation. You would have to include probably a 1st round pick in this, probably another pretty high asset as well in terms of a prospect. And I don't love Joonas Korpisalo. Mike McKenna described him as more of a project than a sure thing right now. The Oilers need sure things. I love the idea of Laine. It would cost a ton to get him, and you'd have to give up Barrie and Kassian to make the money work on top of it. And Korpisalo just isn't a great fit. Moving on to this one from Stephen Bradley B. I actually really like this one. He has Tyson Barrie going to Buffalo, Mark Pysyk and Cody Eakin coming back. Cody Eakin is a guy who could maybe be a bottom 6 centerman, add some grit and intensity to the Oilers' bottom 6, which I personally think they could use. Mark Pysyk's have really good defensive numbers so far this year on a Buffalo team that's not that good. I like the idea of adding Pysyk in this deal. He fills the hole on the 3rd pairing on the right side that Barrie would leave. It maybe wouldn't make them that much better of a team this year, but by losing Barrie's contract in the offseason, you're freeing up an extra $4.5 million. That's going to make life a lot easier when it comes to signing Jesse Puljujarvi, signing Kyler Yamamoto, and signing another starting goalie for next year. I love the idea of offloading Barrie. He has no trade protection, so you could trade him to Buffalo if you wanted to. He can't stop you from doing it. I wonder a little bit if it's a good fit for Buffalo. They do have Rasmus Dahlin on their power play and Owen Powers coming up next season as well. So I don't think it's a great fit in that regard for the Sabres, but the idea of dumping off Tyson Barrie to a team that could maybe flip him, and maybe that's what Buffalo would be doing here, I think is interesting, and I think is something the Oilers could take a look at. Moving along, we got a few more here to get through. Michael 7485055, hell of a handle there. He has Barrie and a 2022 first and Dmitry Samorukov going to Arizona for Jakob Chychrun. He adds the cap hit balances, which it would, 4.5 for Barrie, 4.6 for Jakob Chychrun, and then Barrie is a trade piece for Arizona. And that'd be interesting because if Arizona can quickly flip him around, let's say they can get a 3rd round pick or a prospect or even a 2nd round pick if they retain money for a guy like Tyson Barrie, well, all of a sudden that adds a little bit more to the pot for Arizona, but I still don't think it would be enough. I think the Coyotes and their GM Bill Armstrong want a slam dunk A-level prospect, and that's not Dmitry Samorukov. I think this deal's close, though, if you were to say Barrie, a first, and a guy like Philip Broberg, but I don't know if the Oilers are going to be willing to part ways with him. I think I would. I really like Jakob Chychrun. He's a guaranteed sure bet right now, and his contract is fantastic, but I'm not sure if this is a move that Ken Holland would go for. Sticking on the Jakob Chychrun topic here, we got one from Bennett Carlson on Instagram. He had Broberg, Lavoie, a 2022 first, and a 2nd round pick going to Arizona for Jakob Chychrun. And I think this is way too much. If you're giving up a good forward prospect in Lavoie and a 2nd round pick on top of the expected Broberg and 1st round pick ask that I think would be the starting point for Arizona, if you're giving up that much, I want another piece coming back. Maybe I would try to see if Arizona would slide Lawson Krause into the deal, and then maybe you're getting a little bit closer to even value in this situation. But this deal, as it's laid out, I think it actually is a bit of an overpay for Jakob Chychrun, which is crazy because I love the player in Jakob Chychrun. Just a little bit too much to give up. Going on to one from @ajulati97 on Twitter. He has a deal for a goalie. Ville Husso out in St. Louis, who's having just a tremendous season as well, in exchange for a late round pick, let's call it a 5th in this example, and Raphael Lavoie. And you know what? I like this deal. Ville Husso's having a tremendous season. He's got a 1.88 goals against average and a 943 save percentage. He's, in a way, stolen the net from Jordan Binnington at points this season. He's only 26. And the other side of this, you might be going, why would St. Louis want to move this guy? Well, he's a pending UFA. If they don't capitalize on his value now, they might not get anything for him. They might have to let him walk in unrestricted free agency. So maybe St. Louis can go somewhere else, get a backup goalie for Binnington for their playoff run this year, bring in a prospect like Lavoie, get a draft pick on top of it, and maybe it would make sense for the Blues. I love the idea of getting Husso. Like I said, 26 years old. This is a guy who the Oilers could sign and have as a starting goalie for a few years, and he's certainly shown signs of being a legitimate starting goalie so far this season. That one from A. Giulati, that gets a big thumbs up from me. Next one, I actually think this one is really, really interesting. It's from @Zinner2.1 on Twitter. He has the Oilers moving a 2022 first, Tyson Barrie, and Dmitry Samorukov in exchange for Semyon Varlamov and Scott Mayfield of the New York Islanders. So Barrie's in there kind of to make the money work. He's due $4.5 million for a few more years. Semyon Varlamov's $5 million cap it, and he's got one more year after this one. Scott Mayfield, 1.45. He's a good defensive third pairing D-man. I don't see a problem there. And the way I kind of broke down this deal was Barrie's contract and Samorukov for Mayfield. I think that's an overpay for Edmonton still, but I can see why that would be close. And then the other side of it would be a 2022 first for Semyon Varlamov. I think that's actually an overpay in this situation. Sometimes people maybe overvalue goalies a little bit. Remember a few years ago when Vegas brought in Robin Lehner from Chicago at that time, and he was struggling a bit at that moment, but he only got them a second-round pick, and there was some money that had to be retained around the league as well there. But he only got them a second. Alex Nedeljkovic, he's a guy who was a Calder Trophy finalist. He was playing playoff games for the Carolina Hurricanes. Even he didn't get a first-round pick. So if the Islanders came at me with this offer and I was Oilers GM Ken Holland, I would probably go back with maybe a third-rounder, maybe a second-rounder in this scenario. But the idea of losing Barrie's cap hit and getting a guy in Varlamov who's shown throughout his career he can be a number one goalie, that would be really, really intriguing for me. Having Mayfield in the deal as well to slide up on the right side, that's interesting as well. His cap hit, 1.45, fantastic for next year. This is an interesting one, but I think the Oilers are giving up just a little bit too much. But again, it's clear the fan base wants a goalie, as you've seen from a handful of these proposals. The last one I want to get to is from Rufio on Twitter, and this is a spicy one. This is a bomb I'm dropping right at the end, but it's Koskinen, Yamamoto, Samorukov, a first, a second, and a third for Sherwood Park native Carter Hart. On the realistic scale, it's probably down closer to 0, but Philly's heading towards an aggressive rebuild. Those are the words of their GM Chuck Fletcher. Maybe they're in the mood to do something stupid and trade away a 23-year-old who I think is already a starting goalie in the NHL. You can look at his numbers this year. He's bounced back beautifully in the crease for the Flyers. This is a guy I would give up a ton to get. Would I give up a first, a second, a third, Yamo and Samorukov in the deal? It's not that much of a stretch, if I'm being honest. Carter Hart is a guy who signed for a few more years at $3.9 million. Reasonable cap hit, and he could very well be your starting goalie for the next decade plus here in Edmonton. It's a big package. Philly would never bite, but why not dream, Oilers fans? And that's how I'm wrapping up today's video. Feel free to drop some more trade suggestions down in the comments, and who knows, maybe sometime in February I'll drop a part 2 in this series. There'll be plenty more trade talk coming, so keep it locked. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I'm Tyler Yaremchuk, and we'll be chatting trades again soon.